Hi folks, with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a few vids I've seen online about activists, globalist, paid up hustler, cheap two-bit activists doing the rounds of the main media outlets, who give them free rein, by the way, as they're part of the whole propaganda messaging and distribution system, but saying that Britain and Europe in particular, but Britain in this instance, has always been a nation of immigrants. On one side, somebody has said that they've been to, say, Birmingham or somewhere like that, or the suburb of Tower Hamlets in London, and they've walked through it and found that they haven't seen a single white person. And all they see is, people wearing the national dress of Bangladesh or somewhere, and street signs in all sorts of other languages other than English, that is. And again, we're talking England here. And the place smelling, looking, and sounding like just a city in Bangladesh or Pakistan has just been lifted up and dropped straight into the middle of England. No English being spoken anywhere. The people working in the shops can't speak a word of English, and the list goes on. So they're saying, well, this is not an English city anymore. Then the outrage merchants, again, carefully choreographed, scripted, paid up, and organised and coordinated. They come in, well, no, you're a Nazi. Where's your swastika, you damn Hitler? England's always been this way, always. I mean, as far back as all time, England's been a nation of immigrants, and there've been Bangladeshis here everywhere all the time since all eternity. This, of course, is an outrageous and grotesque untruth, but nonetheless, that's the propaganda they push. And they seem very confident they're going to get away with it. The news anchors don't push back on this at all or question it or anything. Whereas if someone pushes say another guest they've got on the show does query that, so it's not true, then they're quickly denounced and interrupted, and where's your swastika, you damn Hitler, and this sort of stuff. So they're shut up pretty quickly. So let's have a look at the facts. Now, depending on whose numbers you look at here, Britain was between 0.8 and 1.15% non-white in 1968, so using that as a sort of a benchmark. Now, now I don't know what they mean by non-white. Did they mean people that are slightly swarthy? Did they mean black Negroes? Did they mean people from Pakistan, or because some of the people say the Caribbean people, not all, but some of them were probably a quarter black, maybe. So there was a whole lot of shade, the coloured as they call it. There's a whole lot of sort of shades there. So I don't know how many were really full black or dark brown or anything. That's sort of a little bit uncertain. Now, given the spread and the span of the empire, and how upper class Indians were very light brown, and if they lived in England and had English manners and habits and so on, they probably could have passed relatively unnoticed. Being again slightly swarthy was hardly an issue. So anyway, so let's say we'll just round off the numbers and say 1%. Now, having a look at like, if you look at videos of streets of London in the late 1960s, you're lucky to even see a single black person. I noticed looking at a few videos, you see one black person, but it's the same black person actually appearing in other videos. So it's not like it's random black people. They must have a setup there to make sure a black person appears, and they use the same actor or activist or whatever it is to walk on, do the walk on sort of thing in each scene. But you don't see any black people at all. Now, these are the main shopping districts, so you might not see too many there, but you would see some. if it was a land of or a nation of immigrants. You don't even see brown people. A lot of very pale skinned, freckled, red-headed type folks around, or that pale skin type gig. So no, there's no black people around. Black people were so rare that they caused like something of a sensation. At some during the holiday season, it must have been like July or somewhere around there. There was a restaurant in somewhere in Devon. I think it was like in somewhere like Torquay or Plymouth or somewhere like that, that hired a black waiter to work in one of their restaurants, or a restaurant in that area. And again, this is only a short-term gig in the summer season. And the guy was a Negro, and so they hired this guy. It was such a sensation that it made like the front page of the local paper, and people were reporting like, say, they'd never seen a black person before, and they were amazed. There was, they interviewed a child who said, they were amazed that even though the person was black, the palms of their hands type thing were white. So how could that possibly be? So it caused a stir and a sensation, like wow, holy crap, And maybe it was a marketing thing. Maybe it worked. People were flocking into the restaurant just to see this black dude. Maybe it was a clever marketing ploy. But the point that I'm making there, it was so no one, none of these people had ever seen a black person before, and were quite shocked and surprised and even startled by it all. Such was the sensation of this one black. But this was only in 1968, for goodness sakes. Now, this is supposedly when, like, the Windrush generation and so all these, illiterate, unemployed black people from the Caribbean had come along to rebuild England after the war. I mean, that alone is a grotesque and evil untruth. But as we go along, sure, there's people coming to England. It's a bit, or Britain. It's a little bit hard to say exactly how many were black or brown. Like, were they from India or from Pakistan or from the Caribbean or Africa or whatever? But now the amount of non-white immigrants coming to Britain was still very low. The majority of immigrants coming were from maybe short-term to study or to work, were from other white empire countries like Canada or Australia. A lot of Australians working in London at the time. And they were staying at places around Earl's Court and that sort of thing. So there still wasn't really very much. You still would, and again, just getting sort of videos, street videos from London in the 1970s. Again, this was primarily in the shopping districts. The Carnaby Street type, Trafalgar Square and this sort of thing. You'd see sort of maybe an occasional non-white person, but not very many. There clearly wasn't very many around. But in the early 1980s, there was a sudden uptick. So from around 1.5%, it suddenly over a couple of years jumped from 1.5% to 3.5%. Now, I don't know why that was, because this was at a time of quite high unemployment in Britain. So suddenly a lot of non-white people come arriving and giving citizenship and that sort of thing in Britain, when Britain already has a lot of unemployed people. So it just didn't make any sense. Why would you be bringing in more people to just go on the unemployment lines and to receive state benefits and handouts and the like? So that nearly doubled in that early 1980s. Sort of bounced along, started to pick up again in the late 90s when Tony Blair came along, but that wasn't instantaneous, but it did move it up. But where it began to skyrocket was even in 2001 too. Some, depending on whose numbers you look at, only 6 to 7% of the population was non-white. Now, I'm assuming the government stats are active here, because we know that all Western governments quite aggressively attempted to hide the scale of migration, particularly if it was brown and black people coming to a white country. They wanted to play that down as much as they could. They would try and classify them as students or temporary work visas. They'd use any trick they could to try and keep the numbers down. So it's a little bit difficult to get a really a tight fix on this without doing an exhaustive deep dive, which I don't really have the time to do. But what we do know is from 2001 up to last year, and again the numbers vary a little bit depending on who you're talking to, but it went from between 6 and 7% of the British population being non-white to being 26% today. So that's, we're getting on 3.5, 4 times the change. Now, there are a couple of reasons for this. One is the British birth rate, the Indigenous birth rate sort of leveled off and declining. But to sort of compensate the other end, senior citizens are living longer, so that the two come close to cancelling each other out, not completely, but close. So the difference in population increase is that in that time, that 24 year span, something in the order of 450,000 a year average new people coming in, and they've nearly all, but not every single one of them, nearly all been brown and black, and from impoverished third world countries. Now, if the Great Replacement theory is raised at all, it's denounced as being, you're a Nazi, Hitler, where's your swastika, and all that sort of thing. But the fact remains, no matter how you want to play it around and how you want to deny it or somersault it or anything like that, is that Britain's gone from being, again, less than 1% non-white in 1968 to being 26% non-white today. And I think that's an understatement. I don't think that's a full count of all the illegals and so on. I would think it's more like overall, if you really got accurate numbers, I think it'd be more than 30% would be non-white. So nonetheless, that's it. So clearly white people are being replaced. There is no effort or encouragement to encourage white families to procreate. So, assuming a pre-immigration situation, the cost of living is increasing. It's essential that both parties work. It's different in a peasant society where there's a lot of saying, well, people work in a peasant society, they can have children, but they mainly work in agriculture, and they don't have things like mortgages and the like. So the family home is inherited and built from local stone and raw materials anyway. It's not something that's purchased as a commodity on the market. So they've got a very different economic system. Also, they work in the fields right next to the place where they live, and they rely heavily on barter and this sort of thing. So it's a very different arrangement in terms of family structure, social structure, economic structure, proximity of work to home, and all these sorts of things. So anyway, that's it. So it is a replacement. There's no question of that. The numbers are quite clear on this. It is a replacement. Now we can speculate as to why, but when you've got millions of unemployed white people in Britain, why would you say that you need workers to bring in workers who are illiterate third world peasants? Why would you? I mean, how does that calculus even factor? How does it even work? So white people are being replaced. Now you could pretty much parrot this or replicate this same thing, say in Australia or New Zealand or Canada. You could more or less watch the growth of and the increase in immigration, again, of illiterate third world peasants to all these places, and it's moving more or less in lockstep over that same period, with the same relative percentages and numbers relative to total population. That's so clearly it's centrally organised, it's centrally planned, it's centrally scripted. The memo, the memo's gone out to the media that you have to run defence and protection for this. Anyone that questions it is a Nazi and the like. So it's clearly going on, and but we can speculate as to why. I think that white people are no longer needed. They were, or the globalists perceive them as not so much no longer needed, but they're an irritant now. Those damn white people, they want democracy and free and fair elections, and they want an independent judiciary, and they want, they want no corruption, clean government and this sort of thing. And that's not what the globalists want. The globalists want something quite different. And so white people either have to change to accommodate globalist values, or we'll kill you off, or we'll make sure you don't exist anymore, which I think is what really is behind this mass migration of peasants. The peasants can be controlled. They become wards of the state. White people, not so much. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.